Okay. After that hearty lunch, always a little bit more to think after lunch, isn't it? I just want to welcome new colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. I know that we've got connections from Brazil and also from the US. So good morning, it's good afternoon, it's good evening, depending on where you are. Right. So my name is Bondiwe Dondo. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Hanganisa Community Fund. And we're an organization that's committed to strengthening grassroots organizations and social movements, believing in their power to drive sustainable change. I wish to warmly welcome all of you to this transcontinental dialogue. It's transcontinental because we've got Africa, Brazil, Latin America, and the US represented. I wish to welcome you all to this dialogue on race and gender, which is co-hosted by our esteemed partners, and I want to acknowledge them up front. Peregum, a Brazilian organization that's fiercely fighting for the rights of Afro-Brazilians. I want to acknowledge their director who's with us today. He is Portuguese speaking, so probably has caught on to one of you say. Okay, lovely. Welcome, Douglas. I also want to welcome you on behalf of our other co-hosts, We the People, a South African organization born from the realization that our constitution, that citizens need to understand the constitution and its history in order for us to strengthen our democracy. I warmly welcome you. Thank you. So today we gather not just as individuals, but as members of a global community committed to challenging oppression, dismantling systemic barriers, and fostering a future where equity is not an aspiration but a reality. This dialogue is not merely a meeting of minds, it's a meeting of hearts, and it's a meeting of lived experiences. Race and gender, as constructs that have shaped our societies and individuals for centuries, carry both the weight of division and the promise of connection. They are lenses through which we see the world, and they are mirrors reflecting our collective struggles and our collective triumphs. Here, across borders and oceans, we have the opportunity to examine these forces with courage and curiosity, and to challenge assumptions, and to imagine a future that honors the full spectrum of humanity. Having welcomed you all and believing that you are indeed feeling welcome, I want to attempt to share a South African perspective on the issue of race and gender, whilst also reflecting on some of the global shifts that are shaping our own discourse in the country. Racial politics in South Africa has been a defining feature of our nation's history and continue to shape its present. It is rooted in centuries of colonial exploitation, formalized racial segregation under apartheid, and the ongoing struggle to address the legacies of these systems in a democratic era. The interplay of race and politics reflects both deep historical wounds and the complexities of building a unified society in a country that's marked by stark racial and economic divides. Historically, racial politics emerged from European colonization in the 17th century, Dutch and later British settlers imposed racial hierarchies over indigenous populations. This culminated in apartheid, which was introduced in 1948 by the National Party, a system that legally entrenched white minority group over the black majority. Apartheid policies like the Population Registration Act, like the Group Areas Act, like the Bantu Education Act, systematically segregated communities, denied non-whites political rights, and ensured economic dominance of whites. 30 years since a democratically elected government in South Africa, the status quo remains very much unchanged. Black people, who make 81% of the population, only own 4% of privately owned land. 1% of the adult population, which is predominantly white, holds 55% of the wealth. Unemployment among Black South Africans hovers in the region of about 40%, whilst white unemployment is closer to 90%. 64% of Black people live below the poverty line, compared to 1% of whites. And although 40% of households in South Africa are women-led, the gender pay gap is such that women earn up to 20% less than men for equal work. In fact, shockingly, women make up only 3% of CEO positions in JSE-listed companies. And I know these are just statistics, but these statistics highlight persistent disparities as evidence of unaddressed racial and gender injustice. Policies aimed at addressing these inequalities have fallen short, and recent developments in our country are dominance has declined. Its vote share dropped from 40% to 40% in the 2024 election, forcing a coalition with the DA in what they have called government of national unity. This partnership has reignited racial debates, with many Black people accusing the ANC of betraying Black interests by aligning with the white-led party. Many argue that this political union will stagnate and perhaps even reverse redress policies such as land restitution. Conversely, some white communities feel marginalized by policies they perceive as reverse discrimination, a sentiment that's been amplified recently by organizations such as AfriForum, who argue that South Africa's racial politics remain in the minefield. The ANC continues to defend redress policies amid external pressures, like the US president's offer to resettle Afrikaners in the US due to racial discrimination. And in fact, the strength of the coalition, the coalition government that we have, is being tested by the feasibility of this non-racialism. The nation's challenge lies in balancing historical connection with inclusivity, a task that's complicated by entrenched racial identities and economic and gender inequality. The question is whether or not Black people, having endured centuries of oppression, of humiliation, and dispossession, are entitled to restitution in this democratic dispensation. And if they are, what does that restitution look like? And luckily, I don't have to answer that question. Hopefully, our panelists might attempt to do that. At a global level, and led by the current US government, we are seeing a concerning positioning around corporate and government-led diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these are programs that are aimed at addressing centuries of racial and gender discrimination. And these are programs that are aimed at addressing centuries of racial and gender discrimination. They argue that they promote reverse discrimination or identity politics. Discussions about systemic racism, gender identity, and privilege are often dismissed as divisive and exaggerated. This as many Black people continue to live on the socio-economic margins, and we are seeing a growing gender roles. These seismic shifts in global power dynamics are characterized by a rise of nationalist and populist movements challenges to traditional alliances and institutions such as the UN system, economic protectionism, which we are seeing very much in the US, a skepticism of globalization, and a very transnational approach to international relations. And lo and behold, we are also seeing an expansionism. We are told by one nation that they need another nation for national security. It is difficult not to imagine that at the partitioning of Africa at the infamous Berlin Conference, this very same phrase might have been used, that we need Africa for our economic progression. It was in 1884 then, it is 2025 today, and 140 years later, very little has changed. The experiences of South Africa, the US, which is represented on the panel, and Brazil, which will be shared by, in greater depth by my colleague from Brazil, Douglas. All of these experiences point to a world that's increasingly interconnected and yet still deeply divided. Conversations about race and gender remain critical. These are not just academic or policy discussions. They are conversations about identity. They are conversations about dignity. They are conversations about opportunity and human rights. They shape the realities of the billions of people worldwide and determine the futures we build for our next generations. And to our participants, both in this room and those out of the room, from every corner of the globe, your presence here is testament to the power of dialogue. You bring with you stories of resilience, insights born of adversity, and visions for equity that transcend national boundaries. And whether you are joining us from Brazil, in the remote villages of some of the Quilombolas, or the crime-ridden townships in Johannesburg, or even in the bustling cities of the US, your voice and your perspective matters. And as we embark on this journey together, let us commit to a few simple principles. To listen with empathy, it is a delicate subject. To speak with integrity, and to disagree with respect. And I think our goal today is not to arrive at a single answer, but to weave a richer tapestry of understanding, one that reflects our collective struggles and the challenges of our shared humanity. This is a space where no question is too bold, where no perspective is too small, and where no truth is too uncomfortable. In fact, let us not shy away from discomfort, because often it is within that discomfort that perceptions are removed. And most importantly, I would like us to recognize that this dialogue is not just about words, it's also about action, it's about transformation, and the collective power that we hold. So as we ask ourselves the question, how did we get here? We must follow it with the question, how are we going to get out of this? Let us stand in solidarity with one another, recognizing that together we are much stronger. Thank you very much, and I'll welcome you again and hope that we'll have a very meaningful dialogue, very reflective dialogue, and that will walk away much richer than we to invite Lebohang Ramaphosa. She will be hosting our panel and moderating the panel, and she will introduce the panelists to us. I'm hoping that we are able to connect our colleague in the US, not yet, okay? So let's hope that during the course of the conversation, we might be able to connect them. But Lebohang, please come.
Thank you very much, please, those that are joining online, and everybody who is here today. It is indeed a great pleasure and quite a humbling experience to be here today and facilitating a dialogue with some of the most respected, powerful panelists who are going to share their thoughts about the moment that was so eloquently defined by both Ivendondo, the Executive Director of Hanganisa Community Fund. And I really would like to thank Peregum, the People's South Africa and Hanganisa for bringing us together. And would like to thank Peregum, the people of South Africa and Hanganisa for bringing us together and to have this dialogue. Just a few opening remarks before I introduce our panel is that it is not lost to me that we are having this dialogue at the Women's Jail at Constitutional Hill. I was a young girl, I'm now young at heart, although I'm young at age. I'm in my mid-50s. And walking from my flat in Hillbrook towards Wits University. And I remember a couple of days where you will hear screams from what was the top of a building that you did not know what was happening there. It is years later, post-democracy, that you actually realize that the place that we are sitting here was a jail. And more importantly, it housed the women's jail. And I want to invite all of you who are here, some of you who are not here, who are probably from Brazil, that when you visit South Africa, you come and see this iconic place that became the seat of our constitution in South Africa. I'm a storyteller, I'm a media person, and symbols are important to me. That we are gathered here today at Constitution Hill, we are gathered with an organization called We the People, that basically brings us here. We are gathered here in solidarity with an organization in Brazil that is also fighting racial justice. And we are gathered here by also an organization that represents a fund for communities to enable them to exist. And it is against that background that I think this conversation is important, because it is about how might we reorganize against the backlash that we are facing. The other guy on the other side of the pond has made this an emergency. But truth be told, the backlash is not only coming from the US. For many years, even across Europe, ultra-right or conservative governments have been elected. And we are seeing not only the election of ultra-right government, but also a very systemic project of disinformation, where even in South Africa, we are rewriting history about who is the perpetrator and who is the victim of whatever we want to call is happening in South Africa. So I guess for me, while it is important to listen to the conversation that the esteemed panelists are going to have, it's also going to be very important for us to think beyond this conversation about how we might organize differently, seek each other as allies, because indeed freedom was not free. And if we don't secure the freedom that we all gained and worked so hard for, we may, in fact, we used to think that is going to happen. We are in the middle of the storm, as we speak, with all of our freedoms being eroded. And so it gives me great pleasure to invite our panelists, one of whom will join online. I don't know if she's already here, not yet. Okay, so I'm going to ask the other panelists who I'm going to introduce to basically join me on stage. Firstly, I'm going to call Gail Smith, who's a feminist writer, a journalist, and a media strategist. And according to what is on LinkedIn from Hanganisa, a powerhouse feminist writer who has produced groundbreaking content like The Feminist Being, South Africa's first unapologetically feminist talk show, and has led major dialogues on health equity and gender justice. And she's got deep roots in storytelling and activism, and will bring a sharp intersectional lens and decades of experience to the fight for what? For human rights. Our next guest is also a powerhouse, is Nyeledi Magaze, who is a change leader and attorney with 25 years of experience across the private, public, and civil society sectors. She is a fierce advocate for equity and inclusion, and she leads transformative conversations on diversity, justice, and responsible leadership. And she does so often from the historic Constitution Hill DC, where we are hosted right now. Her work bridges business, law, and activism to build more equitable futures. I'll introduce Melanie when she joins us. And our next panelist is Sarah Bramko, who is taking pictures at the back. And she is a lawyer with a master's degree in law from the Pontifical Catholic University of Sao Paulo. She is an activist in the Brazilian Black movement with 10 years of experience in civil society organizations focused on promoting racial equity. Her career also includes experience in advocacy and international coordination, and she's currently responsible for Peregum's international advocacy advisory area and continues as coordinator of the Civil 20 Secretariat in South Africa. Before we start with the conversation, I am going to invite our partner from Brazil and the executive director of Peregum, Douglas Belcher, to come and give us his opening remarks and also set the context about this transcontinental dialogue. Over to you, Douglas.
So she wrote the say him. Okay, so he's speaking Portuguese and then she will English. Okay, you don't choose the name. No, because of the sound. Good afternoon. Não sei falar melhor. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
Esse é meu limite para essa língua tão bonita de vocês. Vocês estão bem?
Yes.
Yes.
É uma honra para mim estar aqui. É a primeira vez que venho à África do Sul. Nós que organizamos o movimento negro no Brasil, temos vocês como referência. Temos como referência a luta por justiça para as pessoas negras aqui. O movimento negro brasileiro se inspira em vocês. Eu estou emocionado de estar aqui conversando com vocês agora. É uma viagem muito rápida. Eu cheguei ontem, já vim embora amanhã. Mas já fui no museu no apartamento de hoje pela manhã. Vou dar um jeito de, antes de ir embora, em Soweto ainda. Para celebrar essa memória que vocês construíram aqui. Muito obrigado. Agradecimento o convite, a possibilidade de estar aqui com vocês, as mulheres incríveis. E com a minha tradutora maravilhosa. Eu vou falar um pouco do Brasil. Falar do Brasil para tratar um desafio que é planetário. Porque há um projeto de dominação se radicalizando nesse momento. E o projeto de poder que se radicaliza é um projeto de poder supremacista branco. E reafirma a lógica colonialista para esses novos tempos.
eu vejo muita similaridade dos desafios que nós temos no Brasil e na África do Sul.
I see a lot of similarities in the challenges we have in Brazil and South Africa.
Os números que a companheira trouxe agora há pouco são similares do Brasil.
The numbers that you presented are similar to the ones that we have in Brazil.
No Brasil, nós temos 56% de população negra.
In Brazil, we have 56% of black population.
Sabiam disso? Que nós temos uma maioria da população negra no Brasil.
Did you know that we have this number, 56% of the majority being black people in South Africa?
Portanto,
In Brazil, sorry.
portanto, assim como é na África do Sul, trata-se de um debate sobre direitos de uma maioria populacional.
The same as happens here. We are talking about a common or fight against injustice to a majority.
Se fosse debate sobre direitos de uma minoria, seria muito importante.
If we were here debating a minority, it would still be important.
Mas tentam tratar esse como
As though it is real.
e tentam colocar numa caixa de debate identitário.
So they try to embody it as though it is an identity issue.
E usam essa palavra no Brasil para desqualificar a luta por direitos humanos da população negra.
And they use this term to try to negate the fact that we are talking about human rights and we are talking about the treatment of rights of black people in Brazil.
Assim como fazem também com a luta por direitos das mulheres,
The same way they do it against the fight against women's rights,
que também é uma maioria populacional no Brasil,
which is also women's rights,
que também é uma maioria populacional no Brasil.
which is also in Brazil.
Mulheres são maioria do povo brasileiro.
Or majority in Brazil, sorry, rather majority in Brazil.
E há uma história de políticas de repressão que atinge especificamente a população negra.
And we have political oppression that is targeted at black population in Brazil,
Diferente do sul dos Estados Unidos e da história aqui do
which is different from United States and South Africa.
com as políticas do apartheid e de segregação lá,
With the apartheid policy and segregation there,
em que a separação de direitos se deu em forma de leis.
the separation of rights is it comes in a form of laws.
No Brasil nunca houve leis explícitas
In Brazil, we don't have explicit laws or specific laws
de criminalização ou negação de direitos para pessoas negras.
of criminalization or the negating of rights of the population.
No entanto, a realidade social sempre condenou essa população a ter menos direitos e a ser mais alta a violência.
So the population or society as a whole has condemned these people, denying them of their rights. They make them seem like a minority, but they are a majority that are being affected.
E nós nunca tivemos governos, até a eleição do Lula, em 2002,
And we've never had government until the election of Lula in 2022
que tivesse reconhecido profundamente que racismo no Brasil é um problema do Estado.
that recognize that racism is the problem of the state.
E um problema que estrutura os problemas sociais no Brasil.
And it's a problem that structures the real problem of racism in Brazil.
Então, em todos os índices sociais, a gente vai perceber que a população negra é a mais atingida pelos problemas sociais.
Given all the indices, it indicates clearly that this racial situation is a problem and is something that is targeted in Brazil.
Então, por exemplo, do ponto de vista dos direitos sociais,
When we are talking about social rights,
pessoas negras são aquelas que se formam menos no ensino formal.
the black population, they are less educated,
Têm menor escolaridade,
less educated once again.
evadem mais rápido da escola, saem antes de completar.
They abandon their schooling
Por não ter escolaridade, não acessam bons trabalhos e bons empregos.
because of lack of education. They're not able to access good jobs.
Têm menores salários.
They earn minimum salaries.
Do ponto de vista da saúde,
When we are looking at the health aspect,
o Brasil tem uma experiência muito reconhecida no campo da saúde pública, que é o que a gente chama de SUS, S-U-S.
Brazil has what we call SUS, S-U-S.
É um sistema público universal de saúde.
health system that we have, and it's universal.
É um sistema que atende as pessoas pobres.
It is a system that takes care or caters for the poor.
90% de quem depende desse sistema, do atendimento de saúde, são pessoas negras.
And 90% of the people that access the health services are black.
O governo tira recursos do sistema de saúde,
And the government takes the resources from the health system.
precariza o sistema de saúde.
They make it precarious.
Com isso, a população negra tem menos acesso à saúde.
And with that, the black population has less access to health services.
Podemos falar sobre moradia, sobre oportunidades,
We could be talking about also shelters or owning properties,
sobre como o racismo ambiental atinge especialmente pessoas negras no Brasil.
and how this type of racism affects directly the black population in Brazil.
Pessoas negras são aquelas que ocupam territórios de enchentes e de desabamento por choque.
So when we are referring to habitation, the black population in Brazil, most of them, they dwell in places that are full of floods.
Ocupam territórios acidentados, como morros,
They occupy spaces that are in very poor population, degrading conditions.
como é conhecido no mundo inteiro as favelas do Rio de Janeiro.
They occupy rural areas. I'm not sure if you've heard of favelas in Rio de Janeiro.
Mas também,
Very bad areas like urban places.
mas também as planícies na beira de rios que enchem com choque.
But also some of them, they reside in the coastal areas, and when it rains, you can imagine how they are affected by the floods.
Há bairros que ficam debaixo d'água por semanas.
And we have seen areas that go underground after a flood.
Agora, tem um índice que demonstra a perversidade radical do que é o racismo brasileiro.
And there's an index that indicates the perversity of racism in Brazil against the black population.
Que são os números da violência policial.
That is the number of violence by police.
Então, veja, no Brasil nós temos polícias militares.
In Brazil, we have military police.
E eles têm uma lógica militar na sua atuação.
So they are
The
population and
O Brasil tem a polícia que mais mata pessoas no mundo.
in Brazil, we have a high rate of fatality being by police. They kill the most.
Cada estado tem sua própria polícia.
Each state in Brazil has their own police.
Só no estado de São Paulo,
São Paulo alone,
a polícia de São Paulo, que é a maior cidade do país,
São Paulo being the biggest city in
o maior estado,
the biggest state in the country.
em 2024,
In 2024, that was last
a
year,
polícia matou 760 pessoas.
the police killed 760 people.
No ano anterior,
And the previous year,
matou 740 pessoas.
they killed 740 people.
Essa tem sido a média nos últimos anos.
This has been the average in the last years.
Das 760 pessoas que a polícia matou no ano passado,
Of the 760 people that we killed last year,
75% são pessoas negras.
75% of those are black people.
A maioria são jovens negros de até 29 anos.
The 20% of those are black people.
A maioria são jovens negros de até 29 anos.
The majority of those are young people until 27 years old.
Jovens homens negros em idade produtiva.
These are young men, vibrant young men.
E isso não repercute na imprensa,
And this is not even displayed or shown or exposed even in the video.
não é só a polícia de São Paulo. A polícia, no último mês, nos últimos 30 dias,
It's not only in São Paulo. In the last 30 days,
a polícia militar da Bahia,
the police in Bahia,
cuja capital é Salvador.
the capital being Salvador,
Salvador é a maior cidade negra fora do continente africano.
this is the biggest black population outside of Africa.
Nos últimos 30 dias, a polícia matou quase 60 pessoas.
In the last few days, the police killed about 60 people already.
2 por dia.
2 per day.
Pessoas negras em quase 100% dos casos.
In almost 100% of the cases, it is black people.
Vocês devem ouvir falar daqui, talvez, sobre violência no Rio de Janeiro.
Maybe you've heard about the violence in Rio de Janeiro.
Rio de Janeiro, há muita atuação policial com violência.
In Rio de Janeiro, we have seen a lot of police violence
E um número exorbitante de pessoas mortas pela violência.
and massive or huge number of deaths.
No Brasil inteiro, todas as polícias do Brasil mataram, em 2023,
In 2023,
6.393 pessoas.
6,930 people. We got that.
Não, isso é importante essa informação,
It is very important
para que vocês possam guardar essa informação sobre o Brasil.
I need you to have this context
O Brasil é vendido para o planeta como um país feliz, alegre.
because the image that we are portraying that
Um país do samba, do carnaval,
it is the country of carnival and samba.
das praias,
You see the beaches,
com pessoas felizes, dançando.
everybody is happy and dancing.
Nós somos bonitos e felizes, é verdade.
It is true that we are beautiful and happy,
Mas nós não temos tantos motivos para isso.
but there are not really many reasons for us to.
Mais de 6.000 pessoas mortas pelas polícias. É a média, todo ano no Brasil.
The average is more than 6,000 people killed by police in Brazil. Every single time.
O Brasil é dos países que tem a maior média de assassinatos por polícia.
Brazil has an average kill. I think it's the highest rated country that has killings.
São números de guerra.
This is numbers.
E isso está vinculado a um projeto de poder que naturaliza a morte de pessoas negras.
And this kind of killing, this brutality, is associated with the system that we have.
Quando eventualmente uma pessoa branca é morta pela polícia no Brasil,
When a white person is killed by police in Brazil,
isso se transforma num escândalo.
it becomes a scandal.
Então, esse é o estado da arte sobre a situação da vida de pessoas negras no Brasil.
This is the art of the situation lived by the black population in Brazil.
Ao mesmo tempo, a gente sempre teve um movimento negro muito atuante.
At the same rate, we still have a vibrant movement, black movement.
Com os governos do presidente Lula, depois da Dilma, criou-se um ministério para tratar desse tema.
With the Lula's government, we created a movement and a system to try to attack this system.
Hoje, a atual ministra se chama Marielle Franco, que é a irmã de Marielle, que era uma vereadora política que foi assassinada por uma milícia, ligada à polícia.
We have the minister today,
Hoje, se chama Marielle Franco,
Aniel Franco,
que é a irmã de Marielle Franco.
sister to Marielle Franco.
Marielle Franco foi uma vereadora política no Brasil que foi assassinada
She was a politician in Brazil that was assassinated
por uma milícia composta por ex-policiais.
by a military that was composed by ex-policemen
Pela luta que ela fazia contra o racismo.
because she fought against racism.
Então, há uma série de avanços legislativos,
We have seen legislative advancements
de direitos garantidos em lei
from the right prescribed
para a população negra no Brasil.
for the black population in Brazil.
Ainda assim, os números são esses que eu disse para vocês.
Even though we have this law, I have shared with you the numbers.
What?
These are the numbers that we
Por fim,
have. And lastly,
nós enfrentamos um governo de extrema-direita, há pouco tempo.
we recently faced a government
O presidente Jair Bolsonaro,
where President Bolsonaro
super alinhado ao Trump,
aligned to Trump,
que colocou, destruiu as políticas públicas de defesa da população negra e de mulheres também.
and Benzo destroyed the laws that we had to protect the black population and even the women.
Ele perdeu a última eleição do Lula,
He lost the last election,
mas as forças da extrema-direita continuam muito poderosas.
but these forces continue to be strong in Brazil.
E a eleição do Trump reanima essas pessoas.
Trump is reuniting this
E esse é um grande desafio que nós temos, que ele é global.
and this is our biggest challenge because he's global.
Porque não bastasse a opressão sistemática em todos os países colonizados.
It was not enough that we have this systematic situation, all the colonize countries.
Nós sempre precisamos, antes de Trump, de uma grande aliança da diáspora.
We always needed an alliance with the diaspora,
Mas agora nós precisamos mais,
but now we need more alliances.
porque há um projeto global que visa radicalizar a nossa opressão.
And because there's a global project, global plan to try to continue to infringe us and frustrate our efforts.
Nós nos relacionamos com grupos de América Latina, também nos Estados Unidos,
We are partnership with American-led organization and also in the United States,
que hoje, além de enfrentar o racismo colonial histórico nos seus países,
we are not only fighting against historic racism in our
ou
country,
seja, já é uma tarefa enorme,
because that was already a challenge.
já é um desafio muito difícil de combater.
It was really hard to fight against,
Mas a conjuntura piorou,
but this has increased
porque há a ideia do crescimento da extrema-direita.
because there's this idea of these extremists,
Faz com que os grupos progressistas brancos desses países
which makes the repressive white population
mantenham seu protagonismo.
maintain its protectivism,
E a nossa agenda perde importância.
and our gender loses its importance.
Ah, ok, agora o perigo é a extrema-direita, não é mais o racismo.
Now the danger seems like the extremists, but it's no longer racism.
Nós temos agora a investir em lutas universais
Now
e não específicas.
Now we're investing in global or universal battles and not specific,
E não identitárias.
and not identity.
Então, esse assunto de pretos, de mulheres, atrapalham a luta.
So this thing of rights, women, children, it is really disturbing.
Comprometem a unidade da classe trabalhadora.
They compromise the unity of the working class.
Esse é um discurso que mesmo os brancos que são aliados estão fazendo.
This is the speech that even the white people are making right now.
O que nos deixa sozinhos de novo.
The white allies that are making right now, which isolates us once again.
Então, nesse contexto, é super importante a nossa aliança.
So in this context, it's very important our allegiance.
O Instituto de Referência Líder Peregum tem um trabalho muito parecido com o Hanganisa,
And our institute is doing something that is similar to Hanganisa,
de apoiar grupos comunitários espalhados no Brasil inteiro,
that we are supporting community groups that are dispersed in Brazil,
especialmente grupos de educação popular,
especially the groups that are educating the people,
de
the black
de resistência à violência policial dentro das comunidades
resistance against police abuse, violence, or protecting the communities,
e também de enfrentamento ao racismo ambiental.
and also fight against racism.
Esse intercâmbio é fundamental.
So this exchange is very important.
Eu tenho certeza que outros companheiros e companheiras nossos do Brasil vão se inspirar na luta de vocês.
And I'm very confident that all our partners in Brazil will be inspired by your fight.
A gente espera construir essa aliança.
And we are hopeful that we can have this alliance.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this. Thank you. Are we using the mic? We don't need to use the mic. Okay. I know I will be loud enough. I'm going to invite my fellow panelists to be loud as well. There are a couple of questions that I prepared for the panel, but I think we have had such a rich input from both our speakers, both starting us off and this account of what is happening in Brazil. So I'm going to invite all of you just in 3 minutes or so to just give a reflection of what you have both from the two speakers. Definitely.
Thank you. Thank you to our previous speakers. I'm triggered, I'm sad, I'm thrust back into our history when Black bodies were targeted for elimination. For many years after 1994, we were told that Brazil was the ideal sort of post-racial democracy that South Africa should follow. And I think for many of us at the time, we were very critical about this suggestion because on the face of it, we saw black Brazilians. We could see endless death, and no disrespect to any Brazilians. We could see endless allegations of those white Brazilians, and you always wonder why did that take place? I now understand very, very clearly. It's so clear that the structural violence that is going on, and I was fortunate enough to travel to Brazil last year, and I would advise any black South African to go to Brazil. I think that it's such a complex country with such a very, very complex history and so many similarities to South Africa. I am delighted at the mention of Marielle Franco, who was assassinated. I think her assassination was so shocking to us in South Africa that someone who fought for racial justice could be snuffed out in a moment in history where we had all assumed that Brazil was making movement. But I think that from what we're hearing now about the sheer numbers of extrajudicial killing of black bodies in Brazil, it's clear that things are not all much glory, to say the least. And I think that it really, really does reflect something of our past, but also of our present. It's always not well in our country either. Black bodies are still targeted for elimination, whether it is through the callous disregard of health systems for black people in education. So I'm really, really moved by that introduction. I'm really shocked by the figures that have been offered, and I'm really, really glad that Hanganisa is making this alliance with Brazil, because I think that we have many, many lessons for us to learn from each other.
Great, thank you. Nileti?
Thanks, and good afternoon, everyone. So I think for me, the reflection around the concept of the hierarchy of race, so that pecking order, there's a fundamental principle around white supremacy that I don't think we give enough airtime to, because we see the consequences of it in the things that are happening. But somehow we don't go back to the fact that actually it's because there's this principle and this fundamental belief of white superiority across the world that is the source of a lot of the experiences that people have here. And I think the Brazil experience, the South Africa experience is similar in that sense. So if you're dealing with people who believe that innately superior to everyone else, they will use their superiority to rule and to get what they believe works for them. And as a result, it doesn't matter whether you are in the majority or not as black people. The pecking order is already clear. In South Africa, we also had the in-between. We've got white, Indian, colored, and then black. And it's a pyramid in that the minority white and the majority black. But somehow the oppression happens to the majority, and this is exactly what happened in Brazil as well. And I think we need to internalize that concept so that we know how to react. It's not the numbers that matter to this system. It's the power. And the power sits with the minority, which is the white minority, so about 8% black. Somehow we're not shifting this, so it's not a numbers game. The second reflection for me is this divide and conquer concept, which was done in South Africa, and I took tours, by the way, here at Cornell as part of the stuff that I do, leadership tours, I call them. And part of what I tell people about the divide and conquer of colonialism and apartheid is that they also did it to us as black people, because they knew that if we are united as the black people, we will, just by sheer numbers, conquer. So they used our tribes to create that divide and conquer. And we are perpetuating it in our democracy. It's not just in sometimes how we engage with each other as black people from different tribes and are being controversial, but it doesn't really say this truth. It's also in how spatially we either live or not live with each other. And I think that's an important element around divide and conquer So even across the world, they've done that to say we will divide and conquer so that South Africans and Brazilians in this case don't even get the chance to collaborate and create their own strength to be able to fight systems. We are busy fighting our own internal battles, but also sometimes fighting with each other such that we forget the bigger issue that we have to fight against. And I think for me, those are the two big things that have kind of settled in my mind based on the reflection. What both of us spoke about is more the consequences of this superiority and the divide and conquer.
Sarah, listening to our experience in South Africa, Brazil, I'm sure the Brazil story, what
So what I would say is that, as Lucas has said, for us, South Africans are an inspiration. You know how you fought against apartheid and all that. But at the same time, it's frustrating when you get here and you see like how, even though there is no apartheid anymore, how deep the social inequality and racial inequality is in the country. And one thing that stood out for me is the high rates of unemployment among the youth, right? So this is something that in Brazil we also face. So the Black Brazilian youth, they have a hard time accessing the labor market, even though we are well qualified for that, right? So then seeing here how deep that social inequality is, that really like stuck out with me. Another thing that only mentioned that is very similar to this as well is the condition of women. So in Brazil, Black women are the majority of the population, and even though we are the ones who live in the forces, right? So in that sense, very connected as well. And another thing that I would address is the trial struggle. So what I feel is that at some point South Africa was like in the global eyes because of apartheid and attitude of the but once that ended, and then you had Mandela as the first Black president, it seemed like everything solved, right? And then we don't hear about what's happening in South Africa anymore regarding the racial equality. And then it's the same thing that happens in Brazil. So even though we have deep struggles, we have a very strong and powerful Black movement that is also always pushing. And to now see what happens there against us, we have a hard time making that make our voice global as well. So there's this deep denial of what Brazil really is, right? Reflects on how the world sees us. So this idea of the racial paradise is still very, very strong when we are outside of the country. So for me, I have like the feeling that here in South Africa, interaction with some white people here, I feel similarity with the way that the Brazilians behave as well. So it seems like, oh, everything's cool and everything's fine, you know, but you feel the racial tensions at the same time. So this is like what has stuck with me, how like we managed to make our struggle invisible and see that everything's fine when it might be worse.
Thank you. Just to draw our attention that our other panelists, Melanie Willingham Jevers, I hope I'm saying your last name properly, Melanie, has joined us online. She's on the screen for those that are in the room, and I'm sure those that are online can see her. And I'm going to introduce her. And I don't know how much of the initial remarks did you hear. I do know that you're not here for only one, but I don't know how much you had from Douglas. So I'm going to ask you to reflect if you had Douglas, but I'll also ask you your first question, just so that we go to you. But before you do that, we are very, very excited and welcome, Melanie. We have already welcomed everybody. By way of introduction, Melanie is the first Black and non-binary Executive Director of GLSEN, leading the charge for LGBTQ+ youth, gender, racial, and disability justice, She was named one of the out 100 most influential LGBTQ plus people of 2023, and she is transforming GLSEN into a truly intersectional liberatory force. From launching the nationwide Rise Up campaign to reshaping leadership for equity, Melanie's impact is bold, visionary, and unstoppable. Welcome, Melanie, and we are very excited to have you here. And maybe if you have a Douglas, I'll also ask you to reflect on Douglas's remarks. But you are based in the US, and I think particularly in South Africa, we are watching almost, I can't even say on a daily basis, I think on an hourly basis, executive order upon executive order. Some people added on WhatsApp groups they should not be in. I mean, we are watching a lot. We are no longer watching dramas now. We are watching what is happening globally. And as you have seen, for other reasons that I will ask my South African colleagues to talk about, an attack specifically, not exclusive, but specific, asking two questions. Are you surprised that this is where the US is? I mean, it is not lost to me that if this was Africa, there would have been observer missions sent already to come and look at how Africans are compromising democracy. Now we are watching everybody who's bombed everybody in the name of democracy and being very undemocratic. Maybe, reflect, but also just give us what this moment means. I mean, what this moment means. I mean, sexual reproductive health and rights, the rights of LGBTQ plus, diversity, equity, and inclusion are all being attacked. How did we get here, or how did you in the US get here? Are you surprised? And maybe just tell us how it is like right now as an activist, a vocal, bold visionary dealing with this. But if you had Douglas, maybe some of your remarks on what Douglas also said. Over to you.
All right, thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for having me. My apologies for being late. You all are on the right time. I'm on the wrong time. So I got my time zone mixed up. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I will try to answer your questions succinctly, and in a way I think that helps contextualize what's happening in the United States, really for you all to be able to use, right? For you all to be able to metabolize outside of the United States, because it really will be taking all of us, both inside the belly of the beast and then our siblings and kin folks all over the world, that help us both address our issues, the global issues that the problem of the United States creates, and also the ways in which our national problems around race and gender are related. They are the problems that we have in the United States and South Africa and Brazil. Those problems come from the same parent, right? Those problems are siblings, just in the way that we are siblings across the seas and in our movement for liberation. How did we get here? It's a long story. And first I'll say I'm so sorry that the problems that we keep having in the United States continue to proliferate and inspire the worst of people around the world. And I want to just lift up that I think that racialized capitalism, white supremacy, and misogyny are self-updating systems and technologies, right? That when we find ways to get free, it finds ways to continue to try to stifle what possibility we've been able to find. And I say that to offer context, not to say that we cannot defeat these systems, because I think that we can. But I do think it's important that we understand that these systems are constantly updating themselves in response to us. And one final point on this, one last point on this piece, which is that a thing I've been struck by in the last several weeks since the current administration has taken power is despite them telling us that they are all powerful, that people like me and others don't exist, they really are moving in a way that tells on themselves. It tells that they are afraid. It tells on themselves that their power, their grip on power is brittle and slipping. It tells me in the way that they are acting, executive order after executive order, that even they don't believe what they are saying. That they are actually trying to stun us into submission. They are trying to stun us into compliance so that they can continue and proceed. However, just like us, they don't even believe the lies that they are telling. They know that it is deeply ridiculous. And the only way they can get around it or get away with it is by moving so quickly that none of us have a chance to gather ourselves and respond. That's my point one of how did we get here. We are the original wound in our country, our original sin. Sin is a hemisphere worth of stolen land and a continent worth of stolen people, right? That there is not enough money in the world to make right, to pay the debt that has been incurred by this deepest crime against humanity in all of our living memory. And as a result, they are acting in a way that continues to run away from that debt, despite saying we believe in democracy, that's what we say in the United States. We believe in a multiracial democracy, probably what you all have heard in your own country. But it's because of that unwillingness and inability to contend with the first and deepest sin and wound that we all hold in this country that continues to make this unacceptable behavior seek to rule the day, because they know once they let it go, they will never get it back. If you ask if we are surprised here, I would ask you, I would tell you that some people are surprised, and the people who are surprised do not look like me or you. Black people, Black women, understood the stakes overwhelmingly. Black people and Black women understood that this was always possible because this has always been under the surface. One thing I would offer is a new take on U.S. history, which is to say that the Civil War was actually won by the South. The reconstitution itself in this moment, we saw it emerge virulently after President Obama won in 2008. It consolidated in 2016. It was very mad and stormed the Capitol January 6, 2021. And it came back to power with a vengeance in November 2024. So we should understand this moment as connected to that moment, which has everything to do with the outright refusal of a multiracial democracy, the outright refusal of anything that includes anyone besides white men, cisgender white men, who have in their vision to have dominion over everyone else as property, including white women. That is who we are in the United States as our psychology. That's our democratic. That's the DNA of our country, unfortunately, and that's what we have. I'll try to wrap up in a moment, but I'll say I'm going to touch on what this means and what it means for LGBTQ plus for LGBTQ plus people, and really what's at stake if we don't get it right. In this country we have experiences of genocide, and I don't think that is unique to the United States. In fact, I know it's not unique to the United States. But the genocidal tendencies of this country's broken and pathological psychology deeply believes that when you kill the child, you kill the future, right? And so I'm going to speak specifically around gender diverse young people in this moment. My organization, Listen, works to make our K-12 education systems, primary and secondary schooling, safe and inclusive for LGBTQ plus young people. We do that because we know that education is the cornerstone of democracy, and we know that belonging is the cornerstone of success for every single person, no matter who they are. And we demand that our system, as long as it exists, include everyone, and ensure that we are affirming, respecting, and nurturing every learner, right? And so in this moment, we began, at my organization, we began seeing attacks from the right wing several years ago, pointed attacks. And I understood that then, and I understand it now as the same thing, which is that they came after us because they understand that we are easily effective. If it is true that a 5-year-old or a 12-year-old or an 18-year-old knows and sees LGBTQ plus young people, sees transgender, non-binary, gender expansive, gender diverse young people as the same as them, then they cannot be groomed or fooled into wanting to or annihilate them in the future. And so this anti-LGBTQ, this anti-DEI, right, the idea of the no diversity, is really coming from a deep genocidal tendency and malady within a white supremacist psychology. That's what this is. And I'm so sorry it's here, but if this is the fight we are in, so it's the fight we have to win. And so what I think that this means is that we have to defend our children, every single one of them. We have to defend our communities, every single one of them, because diversity equals resilience. And an authoritarian and fascist government cannot contend with a resilient community, with a resilient populace. And so really, again, they tell on themselves, these people, they tell on themselves how stupid they are, how mean-spirited, how ugly their spirit is, and how afraid of us they are. And I actually believe them. I believe them that they should be afraid of us. And I want to be the subject of their most terrifying nightmares. And I hope that you all do.
Wow, that's powerful. Thank you. That's what we want to be scared. Now, I think you give me an idea to run with that. I also wish I could be the worst nightmare of people's lives. There's something quite inviting around that concept. Thank you so much for reframing what we ought to do and how we ought to understand this moment. Gail, what we were referencing before, and I think for me, the question I have for all of us as South Africans, and I'm asking this question is, I mean, it's simply how we get here question. But for you, when you look at Africa and the transformation agenda, where we are lauded globally, even around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where we watch at some point to break it down into tiers, asking we need to please just say you are sorry. How did we get to this point where we've got both organizations like Africa? And what do you think that says about what we ought to have done, what we did not do properly around our transformation agenda and our fight for human rights for all?
Thank you, Lebo. Well, I think it's been picked up by one of the previous speakers. It's about the restorative power of white supremacy. It has an incredible capacity to restore itself and to keep going. I don't think we did anything wrong. I think that we did what we never wanted to harm white people. We just wanted to be equal. We never had malevolence. We never had hatred in our heart. We just wanted to be equal citizens in our country and have equal rights. So this narrative that they built up over many years of themselves as victims, starting in the 1930s with poor white syndrome, that legitimated a society that was entirely built around building them up as a white minority state. They had 48 years of preferential treatment. They had 48 years of progressive healthcare. They had 48 years of social security to the detriment of the majority. So it's not surprising. They have had all of those benefits, and they have been very active. The right is all these people. So they have been working to calm the system. So they wasn't behind the scenes before Mandela was even out of prison. They were working the laws. They created an amnesty clause in the law so that they could continue killing us how we're not being duplicitous or malicious in terms of ways in which we want to go this society. But I think also we need to be very cognizant of the power of people like people who learn from us. They understand the power of propaganda. They understand what victimology is and how they can manipulate the media and manipulate people's opinions. And just to your point about the TRC, I think the TRC was a very, very important process, but it was also very important. It was very flawed. And again, they get into the system. They set in place laws that all they had to say was, well, I belong to the National Party. So all the heinous crimes that they did, the extrajudicial killings, the sheer numbers of black bodies that they threw up with explosives because they didn't actually want people to find the bodies of and so many thousands of South African people don't know where those bodies are. So how we got here is really, I think, to the point that many people and the sister here had spoken earlier of the restorative power of white supremacy. White supremacy is an incredibly powerful global movement. And when you have somebody like Elon Musk and other white South Africans in the Trump, Elon Musk and other white South Africans in the Trump administration, they understand how power works. They understand how to restore themselves. So I think that, we did the best that we could at the time, but it is not completely wrong by how they continue to do and how they continue to move around. They understand power. They have political power. They have economic power, and they look out for themselves primarily. Number one.
That's quite a lot, and I must say, it's quite challenging to me. Because I also don't want to follow the narrative that says, everything else that happened, the reconciliation, the orderly blood, the Cook sisters, and the racist was because you can also fall on that. But with what you share, there is a part of me, and I'm coming to you, Nyeleti, about the work that says, at what point do we regroup as the South African majority, as the global disenfranchised, and say, hang on, we may have been too nice. I don't know, there is something there about, and you work in the youth space, and often when I hear people reflect on race relations in South Africa, the narrative, and I'm glad that they brought out, how they know how to shape the narrative and how long they can shape the narrative, is the fact that as long as I take my next child, I've done my part. So you clever blacks who come and say let's share power, that's not what we are about. How can we speak about giving elective reconciliation? And my question to you is in two parts. In a society that continues to be polarized, and I think the disinformation agenda is that. But also when there are such deep-seated wounds. So when I heard Creole and the Creole speak, my anger was not only emotional, it was physical. I felt just as an individual that I could grab somebody. Because how dare you say that? And when so many people have not previous generations, immediate generations, we speak about black Texas black people. We start off by being dressed, and many black women do that. Many black women who are not paid equal. So there is an intersection between race and gender, who are not paid equally today, who still carry 60% of the burden of the young children, but also who are the ones that are sending money back home to redress What about the victim? So how do I wake up and I've not cried not the one to you don't know not the one in Africa, I don't know how you translate it. Why am I not out there with Elon Musk and saying you know what happened to me and my grandmother from this land and stuff? And I wake up and today is he's the victim. So how do we even begin to talk about healing in a country that is further polarized or being polarized?
So, like you said, I work with it's a movement basically where a white 70-odd-year-old wrote a book about the human bridge, the racial healing in South Africa. And a very privileged white man, he used to own Sobe here in Perth. And in his journey of owning businesses, he started in the music industry. He had exposure to a lot of black consciousness as a white man. And in his twilight years now, decided I have to do pen to paper. And he wrote a book, we launched it in September last year. And in November, we decided to start this movement around racial healing. And the only reason I thought it was important was exactly the moment we find ourselves in the country, but also in the world. So, Ian, there is something about these conversations around healing that we haven't had in this yet. And that part is actually in our preamble to say we have to heal from the past. But somehow in that 94 movement, we thought we are starting afresh and moving forward and forgetting the past. Healing has to come with you are in a deficit, you are in a minus. There's something you must fix first before you can say let's move on, right? And that fixing is the trauma of what South Africa went through, and that's the healing that needs to happen. And that is the premise of the work that we're trying to do and trying to collaborate with those that are working around what we believe should be social cohesion. The second piece around this work is, Hanganisa was one of the first constitutional court judges back then under our constitution in 1996, but also a trustee of the We the People movement, We the People organization. Had to say in our paraphrase that, we have the country that a lot of people died in, but we don't have the society that they sacrificed. So we have the country, but we don't have the society which is there. And part of this healing is to get that society that is there. Fast forward to today, what we find when we are having these conversations is that I think AfriForum and Solidarity did us a huge favor. Because I think they brought people into the ring, into the boxing ring, who were opted out. White people were quiet for a very long time, and the cost of the silence of the privilege means the burden sits with the victim to bring up the conversation. They went and put their foot in it with what they did. Said we want to start with the Bella Bill, we want to preserve Africans with the language. I'm for that. If I start speaking Tonga now, maybe 3 people, so far 2, I think that I've identified, maybe 3 will hear what I say. Because we have also weaponized language. I am fluent in Afrikaans, but you will not catch me. I hate the language. I was taught from one, I grew up in rural Limpopo. I went into university in apartheid South Africa. My mother taught biology in Afrikaans. My father taught geography in Africa. So I hate the language. But I'm fluent in it because it was used to say this is how we're going to educate the black child so you can tell us. Now, what they did with Afriforum is that they started a conversation among themselves about being an Afrikaner in the context of being white. And as a result, it was Afrikaners who are saying things, it was other white people who are saying things. I belong to one of groups with the majority of white people where I just watch the space, which is quite lovely. And the latest TikTok was done by someone who was 5 years old in 94, the grandchild of an Afrikaner who served in the food in headquarters all the apartheid regimes. And she talks about what has happened with apartheid colonialism is that if you see South Africa as a glass of water, hot water, take a system called colonialism and apartheid as a tea bag, and you put that tea bag in the water. Fast forward to 1904, we take out the tea bag. But what do we remain with? It's no longer the water, the hot water, it is tea, which has now been influenced by this tea bag. How do you transform this tea? Can you even do that? You chuck it out and bring another cup of water. What does that mean? Metaphorically, and this is why the healing conversation must happen. And it cannot be the plight that the burden of black people bring white people to the room. White people must come to their own room. And Africana moved from Beta London, I don't know if you guys have heard about that, said it is time for us as white people to move out of our white houses and go to the black houses. Metaphorically, says you can't talk about farm matters without two things. Farmers work at those farms and they're black people. And then farm matters come in the bigger context of crime in South Africa, which is far bigger. And a black person still stands higher in South Africa than a white person. So I think that's the context of this conversation is already polarized, it continues to be polarizing, but saying we have to heal, but we also have to use the context of today to bring that healing. So that we don't look at the system backwards and we don't deal with the context of today. Complex, but
Thank you. I think I agree. Yes, ways and we need to take us somewhere. What I want to shift on to Jacqueline said, Sarah, and I'm going to ask you two questions. One is Sarah, and I'm going to ask you two questions. One is the difficulty of getting racial justice on the agenda when you do not have legislators racial discrimination in your country. And the second question is going to be a question, because I'm cognizant of time and you want to have a question, a Q&A. It's a question, and I think Melanie started us off about what this movement calls for all of us, as activists, as scholars, as people who racial and gender justice. So I guess, how do you begin to put on the agenda racial justice in a country that is not people from above, and there wasn't legislation and legal apartheid, but black people are still affected by poverty, and black men are still killed. How do you sustain that conversation in that context? But also with this backlash, how do you, as Melanie said, this global mentality?
No, please feel free to jump in. What I can say is that from here, our past, that we have this lived, right? So I think since the beginning in our history in that continent, we have always been fighting for racial justice. So I think it changes as time goes. Right? So in the beginning, we were fighting for our freedom as individual people, and then we had the dictatorship, and then we're still fighting for our voices to be heard on regarding racism. And also one thing that was interesting, that is interesting about Brazil, even though we didn't have open laws clearly segregating us or instilling a regime of racial segregation, we had laws that would benefit white people, right? So the issue there was always rooted in class. So we say that Brazil is a very elitist country. So the laws that we had, so for example, political action is something that we fought for years. So the black population could have access to political action. It's something that back in the day, white rich people already had political action. So if you have land, property, we would be the ones allowed to go to school, for example. So for a while, poor people who didn't have access to education, who were not literated, they couldn't vote, for example. So what was it did, it highlighted this issue of race on class, right? And at the same time, this propaganda of whitening the country, right? So Brazil, originally Brazil was, it still is a country. So that's why we're like, oh, the racial paradise, we mix it, and all of that. I think that's also a way of also try to hide what happened. But at the same time, because of those issues, and because we could see that the black population was serving systemically, we were always vocal about our condition. So, for example, after slavery ended, the law didn't say, wow, we need to, black people need to have land and jobs and food. What happened there was, okay, you're to go home, do whatever you like. Like the day after slavery, we said that we always said that that's was the most important day because we didn't have anything to sponsor us. So that's, the struggle continues from that moment as well. So we were always struggling, and some of the people, that's why, like, for example, we have like one of the highest population of domestic workers there because a lot of the black women remain working in the houses. So they're not enslaved anymore, but at the same time they get housing. So they would live there, continue to work in exchange for housing food. So they wouldn't have a salary. They're just later on, they fought to have their labor rights recognized, and then they would be able to have a salary on that. So I think that is like, even though we didn't have this legal system, I think at the same time, this sacred legal system allowed us to clearly see the differences on how white people and black people were treated. So I think that's the main reason why we kept, fighting and managed to have our struggle on the Brazil political agenda. And as for the global solidarity, Leslie,
How did I do this? No, I didn't do that yet. How do you import yet?
Yeah, I think this is what we're doing here is one of the things that's very important. So how do we reconnect with each other? Because one thing that always gets my mind when I speak to actually see the black movement, that young executive that already fighting the racial inequality, is that how they didn't have technology, but they were already connecting with South Africa, with the US, with in Latin America, and all that. So now that we have all this technology, we are so far apart from each other, right? So I think how do we use technology? So I think it's one of the main things. How do we reconnect? How do we have this conversation to understand that it's not that Brazil that has more racism than the US or Europe or whatever, but how racism affects us from the different contexts that we are in. So I think this conversation must happen. And again, building alliances. And I do think that the US, because of the role they continue to play in the globe, I think the voices of progressive American people is very important as well. Because what I feel is that they can be heard, that we are not heard. So I do think that having them in the solidarity movement, to support us, not necessarily in the front of the struggle, but even before, for us to talk about our struggle, I think that can be very, very powerful. So that's what we do.
Melanie, I don't know if you can still hear us. I'm just talking about how we might build the solidarity on race and gender justice. I like the point that you made about the work that we do with children, because I think often in the social justice sector, I know youth is who we sometimes include. But I'm not aware, and I don't know what you are about work that is being done by children. I don't know if within this program, we are working with children. But Sarah spoke about solidarity, particularly with progressive movements in the US. And so I just thought I should link that to you and ask, this moment, what kind of global solidarity might we build with each other in order to advance the cause and the agenda, but also deal with this backlash that we are facing globally. Your thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate the question. So two things I want to say are, one, I think it is important for people in the United States to recognize what we have to learn from our sisters and siblings and sibling movements all over the globe, right? I think Brazil and South Africa present incredible examples that we must study if we are thinking about both how to advance liberty and freedom and liberation, and also if we are wanting to be savvy in our defense against this kind of ever-updating technology of white supremacy. And I would say that, it's really what I'm taking most away from this conversation, and that is helping to fill in what I've learned, what I've learned over my life around struggle in South Africa, really is what did we have to learn about the refusal of reconciliation from you all, right? What does it mean that someone can come and get lip service when the majority is being magnanimous in attempts to build a multiracial democracy, and the perpetrators of crimes have been enclosed across their arms and pretend to or express what they need to in order to get acquitted, right? But then have the ability to not participate or build a thing for everyone of ensuing 40 years or 30 years. That's part one. And part two, I think, from Brazil in particular, you all know deeply a dictatorship that we are starting to see the outlines of in this country. And so what you all have done to throw off the dictatorship in your country even recently is instructive to us here in this country, because we don't have that muscle developed. And then the other thing, the two final things I would say is that one, I think for transnational solidarity, we have to build the vision. And we then invite others into the vision, right? We see what happens when we're like, oh, I wonder, what should we do? Should we be a free country? Should we be a democracy? And people say yes, 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 and then they don't do it, right? And so I think that we have to ground ourselves. And I'm saying this as a Black person, as a Black woman, as a non-binary and gender expansive person, as a progressive, we must define what the future is for ourselves and together. And from there, invite others into that vision. And we must be expansive in our vision, but we also have to be strategic, right? We have to invite people in, but we cannot be naive. And there must be house rules, right? When they come into our big tent, they have to take their shoes off, right? They can't bring their dirty feet and their baggage in and wreck their place, right? They have to act with some comportment. And then the final thing I'll say is that I believe deeply that we can only have what we build together. And we can only keep what we can defend together, right? So it's not enough to build. And I think that what we are really good at is building a vision. We are really good at is fighting against what exists. What we have to get better at is building something collectively. That's the only thing that will stay. And the only way we can keep it is if we defend it together.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before I come to data and humanity, I want to open up to I don't know if we can, there are any questions on the chat, or anybody who wants to ask a question online or make a comment. So it's over to you. Do you need a mic? Oh, nobody needs a mic. So you can just stand up or raise your hand if you have any comment or question want to make? Yes, Bogi?
I just want to ask the panelists, how much agency do we give to? Because I'm increasingly getting the sense that we are subjecting our fight to the message of the other side. And I often say to my team, we talk about Black Lives Matter. And I ask, to whom do Black Lives Matter? Because to Black people, it doesn't look like our lives matter for us. And for the longest time, we haven't gotten our heads together. If you look at the countries that are now respected by, Western, former colonial powers, it's not those countries that is giving the most money. It's those countries that have gotten their head together and come to the table, having, organized, having demonstrated that they can run their own society in a dignified way. But we're not getting that from the African continent. Getting from the African continent is a lot of demanding. And yet our leaders are more repressive than any of these other societies that come to us. We are looking at the sort of housing we have for our people. You talk to people and they tell you that the apartheid system that gave Black people better housing than the RTP nonsense that they have today. So how much agency are we giving ourselves as Black people to lift ourselves to a point where we can be a recognized force?
Thought-provoking. Anyone wants to take?
Yeah, very thought-provoking. Our agency has to be for ourselves, and that we matter to ourselves. But there's a lot of systemic issues, I think, that are barriers. And some of it is within our own mindset. There's a lot that we internalize around our own inferiority and what is there. And some of it is actually made it a standard for what we believe we deserve. And that standard is actually quite low. Right? And as a result, there's that internalized part which I think we need to break the shackles from. It's probably a generational thing, and at some point it will take probably a very angry generation, especially in South Africa, of young people who will break those shackles. But it will have to be out of such discomfort that change will come, which is the internalized part. And that's what, and then we've got a government which is Black, which is kind of like, why can't they actually do this for their own? But the Black government inherited a system, and they maintained that system. And to Sarah's point, they became the elite. Yes. And all of a sudden, race is replaced by class. And you and I, and a few of us here, most of us here, have that class that helps us live a better life than the majority of Black South Africans. And so instead of undoing that tea that they found with the example I made, in the empower the government and reverse and change certain things structurally. That's what happened. So we stuck in this concept of, I think what Rima Shakespeare calls it, South Africa belongs to those that rule it. So depending on who's in charge at the time, South Africa will belong to them, not to the people. So I think those are the two things in my mind right now that I think we need to engage with better and more meaningfully so that we take back that agency of being important to ourselves.
Okay? Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. I think it's somewhat unfair. I guess I just want to jump on what Nene said. These things are structural, and it's very unfair to expect individuals to be able to dismantle structures on their own. And again, what it does is it places the burden of responsibility for the system onto the individual who is experiencing it. So I think that we really have to be aware of that these are structural systems that go with something I forgot to say earlier when you asked how are we here, what we don't realize as Black people is that the Afrikaner Brotherhood and the National Party thought long term. I have seen books and I've seen papers where in 1968 they were planning for 2018. They were planning for 20 plans being to fruition. They are long-term thinkers, and that's how we end up with Elon Musk and what's happening with Trump at the moment. This is not incidental, and it comes back to the structures. They built the structures and they sustain the structures. We can't see the networks because we're not in the networks. But they were very, very, very skillful in terms of building these networks and maintaining them over generations, which they pass on to their children, and their children pass on to their children. A lot of the people that are working with Trump and Musk are the children of the Afrikaner diplomats and politicians who were born in the United States. And they still maintain those systems. And one of the reasons why you ask, well, why can't we do this? What's wrong with us? The fact of the matter is none of our grandfathers and fathers were in the Afrikaner Brotherhood. So none of our fathers have insight into what was being planned. We are still on the outside of these structures.
I think the question is, where is the Black people?
Well, that's a very, very good question because, I mean,
Where is the Black people?
well, we have to be careful about that question. We have to be careful about that question because what was the Brotherhood if not the South African deep state? And if we believe in a democracy, we cannot also believe in a deep state. And what they try to do is to be the system that we have now, to your point. Afrikaner Brotherhood was purely about pro-capitalism. It was, I know Piet van Tonder, I know Jan van Staden, I know these are my guys, they're getting all the contracts, their sons will get the contracts, and their sons will get the contracts. Look at all the security companies that mushroomed after 1994. Where did they come from suddenly? Where did they get all of those weapons? That's what only the federal army and the police. If you look at all of the security apparatus of this country is run by very, very men who came into our townships in the 1980s and murdered us en masse. They have not gone away. They are still operational. They are still in power, and they are still there. So to the question of agency, agency assumes that you have power and control of the choices you make. There are only so much agency we can make around the choices that we make when we're not actually in control of the systems that are actually governing us and running us. And so I think while it is important for us to think about agency, we also need to think about unity, because that is the thing that scared them the most. They were outnumbered by us. And when we get together, we are powerful. And I think what comes back to, and to Mary's point earlier, about Afriforum putting their foot in it, I'm delighted that we did that, because what it has done is it has forced white South Africans who have integrity to stand up and be counted. And I think that should have happened in 94. It should have happened at the TRC, but it's happening now, where they are finally articulating their privilege and acknowledging. Because for the longest time, but I did nothing wrong. It's not about human dignity, it's about the system that made it. And I grew up in the South Africa that Elon Musk grew up in. I understand Elon Musk because I come from that society, and I understand the power and privilege that was afforded to those kinds of white men, and the sense of entitlement that they have about everything around them. So I think that our agency, individual agency matters. I also think we need to be cognizant of the fact that we as Africans are still up against power, and many of them that we can't see. We can't see them because we're outside of it. We don't understand how this power is operating because we're not on the inside. I think the answer to your question lies in solidarity and in ensuring that our young people understand our history. Too many of our young people go, oh, apartheid is over. No, it's not. It's not over. It is a living, breathing reality, and the struggle is got to go on.
So it's interesting, but ethnically speaking, I've been going like this in my mind, and I'm going to describe what this is. I agree with you But while I agree with you, it angers me more that at some point, and I'm not talking about you, we were in majority. At some point, the ANC had a 2/3 majority. So we had some power. I don't know if you wanted to establish our own level, but what I'm saying, even now when I listen to our responses, and maybe that could be my final question, unless somebody else has a question.
It was a hand.
What's that? Okay, I'll go to that next before I ask.
Rather from Brazil than
Oh, okay. I think the point that I'm making about, while I agree with you about the structure and the system is, have we not squandered the opportunity ourselves? You know, and is there some responsibility we need to take? In South Africa, you know that what the economy was growing, the ANC and the majority of was the great basket of Africa. What did we do with that? So there is a part of me that agrees with you, but the part that angers me is like, so what did we do when we had an opportunity?
what we did is they just hoped us, and that's
They
what
got us.
they hoped us because
All right, we were
power
not.
of money. We understand it's divided.
Fine. That makes me, now I'm right. You were bought. For some people were bought, they did not buy them. Oh, but you just asked your question. Okay, I don't
No.
Okay, apparently I'm going to jail. I don't think I am bought.
Integrity does
Eu não quero acreditar que o povo negro da diáspora espera essa unidade de nós. De alguma maneira, a gente tem que demonstrar isso. Em 2021, um homem negro foi assassinado e espancado por guardas do supermercado Carrefour.
So in 2001, there was a black young man that was beaten to death by the security at a supermarket
Tem Carrefour?
in Darfur.
market brand, the French brand like Walmart.
Okay.
Oh,
Carrefour.
Isso foi logo depois do assassinato de George Floyd.
And this was after the assassination of Floyd.
Então, foi um levante muito grande no Brasil.
So this was the youth movement in Brazil and awakening in Brazil.
E nós organizamos protestos nos supermercados, inclusive na sede do Carrefour da França.
So we raised some protests in front of the supermarket. We also reached France, the
Com
France.
ativistas negros brasileiros que moram no país.
And this was done to activists, black activists that live in Paris.
Foi a maior queda de valor da bolsa que essa multinacional teve na história dela.
And this was the worst financial period for this multinational.
Porque repercutiu muito.
Because this really made an impact.
Que coisas práticas podemos fazer para dar para demonstrar isso para o nosso público, que a gente está junto. Negros do Brasil, como África do Sul, como Colômbia, como os Estados Unidos, ocupar as embaixadas, ocupar os Itamaraty, os ministérios de relações exteriores no mesmo dia, no mesmo horário, com uma carta comum aos países. Pensar coisas que demonstrem uma unidade. Se vocês acham que isso coisas assim são possíveis?
So, given that example now, what can be done to show solidarity and solid front in terms of a huge movement as this? Like we come together from Colombia, Brazil, South Africa, United States, wherever you are, we create this huge movement where I'm here in South Africa, I'm doing the protest, you are there, the next person is there, you have to send letters, we do it simultaneously at once. What can be done? Do you all think it's possible that we can create such movement?
That's a great question. And I'd like to add to that question. presiding over. Is there a moment where racial and gender justice, including this bandit, I mean, and just for the record, I'm very glad nobody wants me because I own myself. And I'm wondering if this is such a racial capital agenda, whether there is an opportunity, the point that Douglas is making, to use this moment of the G20 and COP, by the way, that is going to be in Brazil, and to raise this very important issue of racial justice. Because you can't exclude racial justice and from issues of land, you can't exclude gender justice from issues of land, from issues of the economy. So how much we even use this moment, both COP and G20, is probably a question that all of you, but because we are involved in the process of the C20, how do you, and you were involved in Brazil, how do you think these moments help us to unite, in addition to any thoughts that any one of you might have to answer that question?
Thank you for the question. So I'm thinking, I think the advantage of being very in the national process, we need the moment, for example, South Africa now is in the presidency of G20, so all eyes are in South Africa. I think it's an opportunity for us to unite, like the example of that Lucas gave. So can we write a letter from different countries and handing to the G20 leaders? You know, so this is like a specific moment that we can have in order to do that. With the same thing with COP30, one thing that we have been discussing frequently, and so the sharing Hanganisa is having engagement around COP30 with organizations from Africa and from Brazil to address the issue around environmental racism. So I think doing those moments around the same time that the leaders are united and then have the media, everybody looking at them, I think can be very sufficient, you know, to address the issues. And a part of me, even though I carry a lot of hope, I think that's what we continue to be an activist. Sometimes I feel that considering this scenario, South Africa is our last opportunity to but probably like racial just going beyond the table. So I do think that this last opportunity that we have to provoke the leaders and considering South Africa, I think it's the moment, you know. So Brazil trying to push that under the C1 engagement group for the civil society. We managed to have a working group focused on content. And this year we also have a working group focused on activities that we do more. So the leaders like they discuss economy, but and they do not connect it to the facts that we have, right? And race needs to be on the center of the economic debate in the world. That's what is at stake, and that's what Trump is doing. You know, if we never resolve our race, that's what we're going to power. Those are the things that I do. When you check the theme of South Africa, and the theme is solidarity. The person says, right? But the second thing is how what we have as area. We working systems and structures that we are inheriting from the powerful capitalist structures of the world. The G20, all these spaces, therefore the structure that we are inheriting, and if we bring the race, we bring the system that's not even ours. So I think there's something about this agency question that we need to think through working things that are not necessarily designed for what we power to the movement, and then the momentum of it gets lost next year because the US is not interested. How much of this will be owned
this minimum solidarity, equality, and sustainability is common in this translation.
Okay.
I mean, I'm a great believer in it's possible now to see. And I think it's a little bit. I think we also mustn't underestimate the power of culture. And I think that is how we can build a movement around G20 as well. My trip to Brazil was like, and I know it's fun, I know it's expensive, but everybody wants to see themselves. And when I went to Brazil, I was absolutely blown away by what I saw, which is people who look like us everywhere, except in the parliament, where I also went to the Brazilian parliament for an afternoon. And they have all of the representatives' pictures. And I was looking at the black people, and I can tell you there were very few of them. So as I was in the parliament, a group of, I think, they were making a presentation with black Brazilians, a particular group of Brazilians, and they dressed in very, very particular way. They all just happened to be there at the same time. I told my skin movement, and my point is how do we go through that and how can we do it? I think there's room for us to grow. But I also think we should think about music and culture and art, because those things transcend language and they speak directly to the heart. In South Africa, to understand music, how do South Africa? South Africans have absolutely no when I was in Brazil, we were walking around this incredible city at rush hour. It's that see, oh my God, these people I think he really is building some sort of solidarity and movement around G20 of using music and art to really begin to get us to understand the commonalities and the similarities. Brazil, South Africa, and those other states. As I said, I think culture and music transcend language in one way or another, around the language barriers, but to really, really touch people at their heart, the power of Brazilian culture, driven by blackness, is one way that we can solidarity and greater awareness around and also demonstrations and raising awareness. And that's why it's something on a continual basis, and it is on a continual basis, and it is because that's how we do not
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask you, your thoughts on how we build and look after that. You have already shared some thoughts, but just your thoughts as a final remark.
Yes, thank you. And I'd like to say a few things from the initial first comment, and I'll end on the comment in our current responses. It's interesting. We in the United States face something similar. The critiques that I heard you all share about the ANC. And for us, it's the Democratic Party. I often say we need better friends because the Democratic Party, even when we get them elected, they, after using our words to get to power, they shun us and tell us to be quiet and go sit down somewhere. So I would offer that it should not be that we have to be perfect to have access to dignity and freedom. I think it's also that we must be excellent. We must be excellent, though not perfect. And we both deserve time to learn, but we also must be accountable, right, to the vision. And it can't be that we are allowed to dawdle, or my grandmother called it that, waste time, and just enjoy the perch, but not do the work for our people. I would offer this too, which is that I think this is the perfect time to talk about solidarity. Because we need that this moment is a slingshot moment, right? We are, what we thought we had, right, was here, and then we are now being dragged back. But they don't understand that this is tension in what they are doing. Backlash is tension. And their grip is brittle and it's slipping. And when they lose it, we go into the future, right, beyond what we can see from where we are now. And as a result, I think that we have to do a couple of things to prepare ourselves. And this is the second part of the second question. I think that the structures that are shaping our current geopolitical realities are crumbling. We see the cracks, we see the contradictions, we see the failings, we see the shortcomings. I don't believe that there are many people who believe that this is the way that it currently is the best way for it to be. I think we all feel in different ways that what we have right now is not what we deserve, but that we deserve so much more. And I think that it makes sense, and I'm so grateful for organizations like yours that are represented in this conversation across borders that are engaging in these big political fights, where these tables happen, fighting for a seat at the table, fighting for an agenda item that reaches and addresses and magnifies our needs. And at the same time, I think we must begin to plan beyond these systems, because we have to be ready for these systems to crumble. And when the systems crumble, as you have seen in Brazil, right, after dictatorship, as you have seen in South Africa after apartheid, as we have seen in this country after the civil rights movement, there are already networks, as we've been talking about, that are organized, that will be ready for the opportunity. We also have to be ready, or else we will continue to fight their fight on their terrain. We have to fight for our issues on our terrain. We are playing defense. We have to get into a position where we are playing offense. It is, and frankly, I'm a former very mediocre basketball player, so I do know that you have to play defense and offense at the same time, all the time. And I just want to offer that we have to begin planning for beyond the systems that are currently in front of us, that are currently shaping our world, because they're more brittle than I think that we have the courage to imagine right now. Things are so dire that it feels like we have to pay attention to what's in front of us, and we do. But we also, I think, have to understand that this reality we have is because they are afraid of what's coming next. And then I would say that, given all of that, this moment is one of great peril, right? But also deep possibility. And so it really is meeting this moment and meeting each other in conversations like this. So like, I have no idea, or I have this great idea, and let's be in conversation. We have to together and show up for ourselves. And I agree with the comment around art and culture, because the final thing I'll say is that the technology that we use is owned by our enemies, and they will use it against us. So where we can be in community like you all are there, where we can touch and hear and smell and hug and feel another person, that's best. And we have to protect those spaces and ensure that no one who leaves us harm are in these spaces, because the technology that shapes our lives and that communicates my voice across the ocean, right, across a couple oceans, these tools are actually owned by people who are not invested in our liberation.
Powerful. Thank you very much. I wish we could go on forever, but everything comes to an end. Thank you to all of you for staying on for longer than the time that was allotted. And thank you to great panelists. Let's give our panel a round. And I think this global solidarity means that this will be one of many conversations that we have, convene, think, and support each other. And on that note, I would like to invite Mandela, like this. Yeah. Mandela, who's the head of education and leader people, to give us their closing.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Yes.
It's it's very difficult to go after such powerful remarks and contributions. And standing here before you as a young man in South Africa, let me start by saying the name is Irfan Mangera of the Mangeras of 14th Street Peters. Our family were forcibly removed from one place, go and live in another place under the segregation laws of apartheid. And so for me, this period has been quite reflective, insightful, but also something that has driven anger as a young person in South Africa, where the actual victims are the ones who are now looking at the oppressors and saying, how are you claiming